Welcome, everybody. We're starting a new unit. This unit is CHCDFV001, recognise and respond appropriately to domestic and family violence. My name is Vicky Hanna, and I'm going to be delivering this unit for you. So to commence, we'll do our acknowledgement to country. In this spirit of reconciliation, Hayter Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live and study. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope that we may move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respect to all First Nation people and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. So I'm going to deliver this unit to us in this recording in 3 sessions. We can take a little break in between each of these sessions. It's a lot of information and it's one of those units that can be quite triggering. So I need you to apply some self-care. If you find that this gets a little overwhelming, just step away from your studies for a while, take a break. But know that this is a really important unit for anyone working in the community sector. So most of our clients have heard of domestic and family violence. We may not have directly had any lived experience with this, but we may know of it, whether that's through the media or through people who are near and dear to us. So let's have a look at our basic human rights here and why this particular unit is extremely important when we're working in the sector. We start off, first of all, with our absolute basic needs, which is safety, food and shelter. And then we move into love and belonging, being part of something, and then how we feel about ourselves, our esteem, and then how we are able to move forward and achieve the things that we want in our life. So the very foundation of all community support work sits around making sure that we are safe and we have shelter. Domestic and family violence erodes all of that foundation for people if they are living in a situation where there could be harm to self or others. So we're going to have a look at what are the work practices for you as a sector worker, for you when you're working with your clients, what the legal and the ethical framework is around there, and to have that underpinning knowledge that you're going to need to be able to cover this subject. What are the values and philosophies around domestic violence work? And then what are the support processes that we can apply if somebody raises that this may be something that they are experiencing or in the past have experienced? So who does this impact? Everybody, even if it's not directly, indirectly. So the context of domestic family violence can be partner to partner, or it can also be sibling to sibling, anything that sits in under the umbrella of domestic. Does not necessarily mean that that person is living under the one roof with you, but it can be something that is considered the law, the domestic family violence law, is treated differently to the criminal act. You can have a protection order until that protection order is breached and there's an investigation proving that a crime has been committed. It remains a civil matter. So legal and ethical considerations, we need to have an understanding around that. So our assessment when we're working with somebody is about what's the current risk or the potential risk the individual caseworkers, where is our client up to in that space? On average, it takes 7 times for a victim survivor to leave that unsafe environment. What is the community development, which is the education around domestic and family violence, what it is, how best to help somebody. And then referrals are around what kind of support might be there, whether someone chooses to stay, which is their dignity of risk, unless, of course, there are children who are involved, and that will fall in under the umbrella for you and I on mandatory reporting. So our clients, we view them as individuals, survivors and victims. And then, of course, there's users of the violence and families. So because healthy relationships is something that's quite complex, there's a lot of considerations that go into this, the same as what we work in that space around mental health. But at the very core, everybody has the right to feel safe. So as a community service worker, you may work with the following clients. So individuals, which includes children, young people, adults and aged, though elder abuse is actually a different law. Those referred to us, or people who self-refer, who seek help, and whether it's voluntary or involuntary. Sometimes the police may have attended, their child safety may have suggested that the family need to go and get some support. That may be your role. People with specific needs seeking access to services may not be able to find those supports themselves. And then survivors and victims of domestic violence, their families and friends, because it does impact everybody and the wider community. It is in the public interest. And then users of violence and their families. So support is there for everybody, but domestic family violence does impact. So the values and philosophies, we need to do a little bit of searching of our own. What do we know? What do we view around this? The media portrays domestic family violence differently as well, but the safety and well-being are free from harm and risk and the wider community. How do we think about this? In your assessment, you'll be doing a research report, you'll be doing a case study, and you will be doing a role play, which is your skills assessment, and you will have 3 different scenarios to be demonstrating those skills. So it's all around domestic family violence, but it will be 3 different stories and how that impacts. And from your reading from your learner's guide, from these slides, and there's quite a few videos that we're sharing with you as resources to give you that underpinning knowledge around that. So we aim by the end of this unit that you'll have enough information to be able to explore some for yourself, what's happening in your local area, what do you know about this from your own lens, your own values and your own philosophies as well. What is acceptable and what is unacceptable? All violence is unacceptable. It is never okay. There is never justification for raising a hand to another person. So because a lot of people view this as private, if this was happening in a public space on the footpath, it would be straight out assault. But because it's so complex with relationships, and there's lots of reasons why it takes on average 7 times for somebody to leave, there's a lot of things that are going through their mind, like hope that things will get better, having an understanding for what those external pressures are, maybe growing up around it where that was normal, even though it still didn't feel okay, or thinking that there's 2 sides to every story. There is not. Domestic and family violence as an assault is a crime. Responsibility for behaviours. the person who is the offending person, the person who is assaulting the other person, is responsible for their own behaviour. However, we support people, we support offenders, and we support survivors. Needs and rights, everybody has them, and so do you. As a worker, you have the right to feel safe in the workplace as well. This can be very complex work, so I want you to do some self-reflection around this as well. So all forms of domestic violence are unacceptable in any group, culture or creed, regardless. It's law in Australia, and it is not an opinion-based. Those who use violence should take responsibility for their behaviour and have access to programs to assist them to change that behaviour to ensure the safety of their family. The commitment to meeting the needs and upholding the rights of our clients sits within our responsibility as a support worker. So there's a video for you to watch there. But keep your values and principles in mind. On reflection after watching the video, you will have policies and procedures that guide you in this. There'll be self-reflection moments, because this is really challenging as well. But when we're working, we may work with young people who grew up in that environment. We may be working with somebody who is a parent who thinks that that level of discipline is okay, because that was how they raise. So there's a point here for self-reflection. As a worker, though, your policies and procedures will guide you. That will sit within the legislation, which is the Act, and that sits around everybody's right, your human right. So it is not opinion-based. Every state and territory has different laws. However, they all have domestic family violence laws. So some states have started to bring in coercive control and defining what that is. Psychological injuries are now being defined what that is under workplace health and safety even. So you'll do a bit of research around here and you'll do some review on that research for your assessments. So go to your policies and procedures. You have a simulated workplace dashboard called First Access, and it will guide you on what are the templates, safety plans when you're working with clients. You'll have instructions to follow and it'll take you directly into those links. It will give you an overview of services that get offered. You may already be working in the sector or have had some experience in the sector. However, for the purpose of your assessment work, we guide you over to the First Access site. That's where your templates are, your policies and procedures. You must go there and use those resources to help you complete your assessments. So you have two types of assessments. You have your written and you have your skills. Skills we do in recordings role plays. Some you do on your own. Some you can have an assessor in real time and your instructions will guide you there. So if you're confident to go ahead and do the ones that do not say specifically that you need an assessor, then please do that and know that you'll have to organise to get people to play the clients. This particular one, though, you are required to have an assessor with you and more than one learner, so you'll swap and play client for each other. So what are the support processes? How we have feedback from our clients, we need to check, and we need to make sure that our line manager and our supervisor is looking after us. That's your support when you're working this, because it is very complex. It's very much a first responder place as well, because you're talking about something that is violence. So when we use an acronym DV or DFV, it does tend to minimise and normalise. However, we use the term domestic and family violence because it is an act of violence by someone who is in a domestic relationship with somebody. So debriefing would be, if it's something very complex, your line manager can help you with that. Reflection journals, training and development to make sure that you have the resources around you, even though you'll do this unit and you'll be competent in that unit, as if your assessments are being passed as satisfactory. If you get 2 or 3 attempts, we'll give you feedback on improving that. However, it's ongoing. This is something that's very much a changing space, and we need to make sure that we continually inform ourselves. So I'll ask for you to do a little bit more research around what's available in your local area. You'll need that for your research assessment. And then what's available on a national level? What are those 24/7 phone numbers? What are those websites as well? Look up 1-800-RESPECT. In your induction slides, that recording, it actually gives you all of those phone numbers. They're helpful for us as learners when we're studying, but they're also really helpful resources for your future clients. So with that research, have a look at what's in your postcode in your area. What training is there available to you on the internet? Do some research, because as workers, we need to continually make sure that we are studying and staying up to date in case those laws change. So I'm based in Queensland. We just recently introduced coercive control, but I do understand that there are other states and territories who had done that several years before Queensland. So make sure that you refer to what the laws are in your state or territory where you're working, and reference those when you're doing your written research. So what's the social fabric around this? It's diverse cultures and backgrounds, what those beliefs and myths might be. We work to Australian law. As workers, you are guided by that. What are the criminal issues? Initially, it's a civil matter. If the police attend an incident, they can put a protection order on there, and that will be to peace and good behaviour is basically what that protection order is. Some people can still live in the same house, but the order sits around there. If the order gets breached, if somebody does not follow that order, both parties, both the victim and the offender, then it becomes a criminal matter. And the police may investigate and charge. So the order is not a suggestion. It's the very thing that will take somebody back to court. It depends on whether the police will investigate, and you need to do your own research around how successful is that? What is the general community trust level in and the confidence level in the protection orders that are put in place? Why are there so many deaths in Australia around domestic family violence? More than one per week. So if English is a second language, you may need to have an interpreter if you're working with your client, just so that you're certain that you're giving the information according to the law and the legislation and the ethical framework. You will get that from the policies and procedures that sit in First Access. If children are witness to it, it is considered child abuse. Even if the partners are no longer living under one roof, if an adult is talking about the other person involved in it, it is considered a form of child abuse if you're having a conversation around a child who is vulnerable, who may have grown up around that. Just leaving does not mean that the children will feel safe. So if you stay in that home where the violence took place, know that through the lens of a child, that's the scene of the crime. Every shout, every door slammed, every hole in a wall is triggering, re-traumatizing, and bonds that child to the trauma. It bonds the victims as well, but for children who are the most vulnerable, for the aged who are also vulnerable, for people who have diversity, also vulnerable. So it isn't a media statement. It isn't an opinion-based. The evidence is there, and the law is there to protect. We as workers must abide by the policies and procedures that sit around our organisation. Your policies and procedures align with the law. So isolation due to rural location, not having those services there. If there's more than one matter, mental health and domestic and family violence, so dual diagnosis, it could be mental health, it could be alcohol and other drugs. Often these things come in together. With that as well, alcohol is viewed, and so are drugs viewed as an underlying causation. It can be religious beliefs, and there are many victim survivors who will go to the church for counselling. However, in some churches, they will view that it is the husband's right. It was only in the 60s that the laws changed. When you hear that term, rule of thumb, that meant depending on how thick and big the male's thumb was, that was the thickness of the stick they could strike their partner with. Now, that was law. Police would turn up and go, okay, I know that's reasonable. That no longer matters. The laws have changed. So when you hear someone use that, oh, rule of thumb, that is what rule of thumb means. That's where that came from. So we don't use it in the sector. Anyone who has domestic and family violence training knows that rule of thumb actually means the size of the weapon that the partner could strike the other with, where that was considered fair and reasonable. And then, of course, mental health issues. Unable to regulate, unable to manage maladaptive practices, instead of being able to pause and take that moment if they are feeling triggered or stressed, to go for a walk and to calm down and regulate and have full control over that. So domestic and family violence, there's one snapshot of time. This will be part of your research. Between 2015 and 2016, the estimated cost of domestic family violence in Australia was $22 billion, and with victims and the community bearing the cost. This is days off work, this is access to health systems, this is in the education system, this is in the correctional space, this is in the courts. In 12 months, that increased during COVID, where people did have less ability to move around. The pressure was on more, and a lot of that happened where people were in lockdown as well. So there's a cost to the community, and there's, of course, a cost to victims and survivors who bear those costs. So the historical and political context is very connected to domestic and family violence. It can be a hot topic in the media. It can be less with certain members of our community. So there's been changes in legislation, just like the size of a stick or a weapon that a partner could strike. That was a change in legislation. There's other changes as well. Community awareness is there. Perceptions are changing, that it is an issue that the community need to be able to address. It isn't where there's two sides to every story. It is unlawful. And that is simply the responsibility of the person who is assaulting the other person. And then what are the triggers for change? Usually if it's been a very violent, a death as well, but there's a lot of hidden stories around domestic and family violence. It is the secret. The very first women's refuge was in England, established by the author Erin Pizzey, and she wrote a book called Scream Quietly or The Neighbours Will Hear You. It shows the complex nature around how two people are caught in the domestic family violence cycle. I encourage you to do some research around what are those complex layers? Why does it take, on average, 7 times for somebody to be leaving? What are you going to be doing as a worker once you've got this information and you've absorbed it and reflected on that? Or if you're a person who has grown up around that, what is your reflection on that now? How safe do you feel? If you work in this space, then you need to make sure around any particular target group where there is violence, that you are safe and that your clients are safe. One of the assessment pieces with this in your skills side will be developing a safety plan for your clients, and you'll do that collaboratively with them. Where are they up to with that? What's a stop-go bag? Getting ready, that can be part of a safety plan. Find some sites that will help you have an understanding. There is one site based in Bundaberg, where I am based, and it's called Edon Place, EDON Place. Go to that website. It's created for domestic family violence. What's great about it is that it absolutely everything as a resource and information is there. It's for all people who are involved in that family unit can get that help. You know, the person who is the one who is offending, and the victims and survivors as well, because this is seen as a whole of community support model. Myths, unhelpful beliefs, attitudes and practices. Myth or fact, violence affects few women in Australia. Reflect on that. Most people committing violence are under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Users of violence are mentally ill. Stress and anger lead to violence. Okay, there's one fact in amongst all of those. When you do your quiz, you'll have multiple choice. You'll have some answers that are looking for based on what you found in your first access dashboard, what you have researched and found for yourself, and of course the information that's sitting inside your learner's guide as well. This is something where you may have a view, a lens over it when you start, but I want you to look at this from the perspective of a support worker, a community support worker. So they would be unhelpful beliefs. So few women in Australia, the ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics, so former partners, there's data on that. In Victoria, police attended more than 88,000 family violence incidences in 2019, 2020, and it increased almost 7%. Because we were working in that state of COVID as well. So these statistics only show a part, only what was reported, not the things where people don't. Legal and ethical, workplace health and safety. So when we're at work, if someone is under duress, accidents can happen. It takes a focus. So it is a workplace health and safety matter. Work role boundaries, very important. That's why now it is law in Australia that there are 10 days assigned over for people who may be needing to take that time off and under the compassionate care around domestic and family violence. And then what are the rights and responsibilities for you as a worker and every other person? Legal and ethical, again, what's your duty of care? If you see it, you report to your line manager within your own policies and procedures. And then, of course, the human rights, and I started with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the right to feel safe and the right to shelter. And then discrimination, different people having different opinions around that, but us as workers know that this is about the law, this is about the legislation, and our role is very clear. We must make sure that we provide that support and services around what is required by law and also your policies and procedures. So we have a duty of care to our clients. Society does as well. But what is that domestic family violence? It's restraint, it's isolating people, it's abuse, it's discrimination in employment or training, not being able to make decisions on your own. The abuse can be financial, sexual, psychological, social, physical, your mental health and well-being, also extremely important. So there's research for us to do. What is a belief in some customs may actually be against the law. So you might be informing and educating your clients. They may not have that knowledge when they first come to see you and work with us. Mandatory reporting, it's a reporting term that we have to use as a worker. So it's for groups of people who are compelled by law to report any child abuse. Domestic and family violence is child abuse. Neglect or suspected child abuse and neglect. So we report for that. Part of your assessment is to say which particular workers are required to be mandatory reporters in your state and territory. So you'll need to do some research. Some of them are the obvious ones, but you'll need to make sure that you've done your research, one, on a national level, and two, in your state and territory. You need to know that because your policies and procedures will expect that of you. And then, of course, it tells you how to do that. So in summary, your work practices, your values and philosophies of domestic violence work, and what support is there for you to be a worker in that space. And in the context of domestic family violence, what does that mean? What's okay, what's not okay? Getting an understanding around the legal and the ethical considerations for us to be able to make sure that we are following through on the work and that our notes, I'll go into that in our next part of it. Let's just take a short break. Okay, so a little bit of a breather. This is heavy going. I acknowledge that for everybody. I want you to take that care while you're going through this particular unit. It is underpinning with a lot of the work that we do, a lot of the learning that we've provided for you. These slides are there to guide you. I'm here to be able to unpack some of the meaning around that, but we've also got a lot of resources, videos. So take your time as you're going through this unit. Each unit is about 10 hours to be able to watch everything, go through that, and then attempt your assessment. So you'll have your written work, you'll have your skills. So know that there's about 50% of the theory and then 50% of the application once you've got that learning from that as well. So let's go back into this space. So this is our second part. So understanding how complex family violence is and identifying and understanding the behaviours of family violence. What might be okay for some family may not be for another. And we need to be very clear around what the law is that we must abide by. And the law is our overarching. The legislation determines what that is, and it is changing, so we need to stay current. And then your policies and procedures have to sit inside that legislation as well. So with that in mind, your policies and procedures are your guideline. That's how you know you are doing it right. Get familiar with all of the policies and procedures. When do we fill in an incident report when someone has disclosed? How do we care for ourselves in the workplace when we are hearing story after story? Because this is something that presents a lot. We looked in our first part of this that there were in Victoria alone in 2019 till 2020, in that 12 months, 88,000 reports. So there's a great deal more that goes unreported. This is something that you'll come across fairly regularly. So here we have quite a few videos. I won't record these for you, but these are what you're going to be watching in that space. Now, each one of those video recordings are going to come to you with this unit. But I want you to do that also in bite-sized pieces. Don't overwhelm yourself with the content. Try not to rush into the assessments without really watching that and then making sure that you're okay through that. So if you struggle with anything at all, or if this is triggering because you may have a lived experience, I encourage you to call Lifeline on 13 11 14. Simply because a lot of students will call Lifeline and say, I'm struggling, I'm doing content, which is actually fairly triggering for me. That is something that you need to be able to do. We do that at work. We have professional supervision, or we debrief with our line managers, and we also keep reflection journals. So in this, there is reflection for you, and that's part of our self-care plan. We do that also with our clients. However, when we come to domestic family violence, it can actually increase the risk if someone is looking through resources to get help. In the first part, I guided you to a very well-known service provider in Queensland, in the location that I'm based in, called Eden Place. The reason I direct you there is that you may or may not have a website, but look in your local area. What services are there and what other websites can you find? But I like to use that because I know it's comprehensive. I know that they can place anybody into accommodation anywhere in Queensland. They work very closely with the police, the vulnerable persons unit there, child safety, Department of Housing, all of the supports, the wraparound services that may go into a safety plan for your clients. So what skills, what micro skills do we need to have once we've got our understanding when it comes to doing your skills assessment? Active listening. Active listening means that we're listening to understand, and we're listening to get some ideas around what that story might be. We maintain confidentiality. So we start every session with privacy and confidentiality. When you go to First Access site, they're your guidelines. In your learner's guide, it will also talk about that. So when we're talking with somebody at intake and assessment, we're actually working out a little bit about the client, but don't be in a rush in that space, because that person could be worried about you sharing information. It may increase the risk to them as well. They're very clear about that. Our role is to believe and acknowledge that this is challenging because someone has come in through the door, and we believe. So we don't form our own opinion. We believe that person when they come in and talk to us about what is happening, and we work to that. So at the very initial intake and assessment, we will talk about everything that you say is going to be private and confidential, unless, of course, there is a risk to self or others are making a threat to you. Keep in mind that as a worker, we are the others. If we are at risk, if we are under threat because that offender is tracking or stalking that person coming to you for support. So you have good work practices. You'll go to the First Access site, and it will tell you what policies and procedures are. And you'll get that knowledge and then apply those skills over. So before we move on to talk about anyone's story, we need to make sure that that person understands. So do you understand? They need to give you consent, because we don't go forward until we have that. So it's informed consent. So I will have to tell somebody if I think that you are at risk of harm to self or others. So that could mean that a child could be at risk that's living there, and we're going to be doing some intentional interviewing questions to find out, because we're trying to assess the risk, the current risk. But the client has either been made to come to us, or they've chosen to come to us, but that does not mean they're ready to leave. So our questions will be open-ended. That will consist of all the who, what, how, when, where, and why. And when we're working with our clients, they may not be ready, and that's our pre-contemplative state. So I just want to talk to somebody and find out what my options are. And then the contemplative state comes in where it's like, okay, I've got a bit of information, but I might need to spend some time gathering that. And then the ready to take action. And this can circle around. It's like, okay, I've gone back to pre-contemplative. I'm not ready yet. Remember in the very first part, we spoke about on average 7 times to leave. That is because it's often referred to as the cycle of domestic family violence. And all parties are in that cycle. All parties have actions that they take that keep them in that cycle of abuse. And then your open-ended questions will help you as a worker gather some information. When is this happening? How often might that happen? Try and get as much information as you can in a safe way without re-traumatizing your client. What they are looking for today, that pace that we are. If we think that someone is at high risk, then you are obligated by law and under the practice standards of a community sector worker to report that. How do we report that? Through your policies. Sorry. Goodness. I just had a little coughing fit then. I'm so sorry. So this is me in real life recording for you. So I apologize for that. So in summary, understand that family violence is complex. You may not understand why someone stays. You may want that person to leave, but if they're not ready, they will return. When do we report that? How do we help them? By building trust and connection and engaging. So if it takes 7 times for someone to come in and you feel as if you're going through this, know that they have to be ready for this to be really effective. So identify and understanding behaviours of family violence. Some people do not know that they're actually in a violent relationship because they may minimize it by saying, well, they don't hit me, but I feel under attack. I feel unsafe. I feel insecure. I feel disconnected from my family and friends. I feel like someone's got control over me. I feel it is very complex and it's very emotional. So logic and reasoning and clarity, the more that someone is under the influence of that, the harder it is for them to see things clearly from the outside looking in. As a worker, we may, but for the person who's actually in this space, it can be extremely difficult for them as well. So go through these videos. In our final part of this, which is our third part, I want you to take that break away in between, knowing full well that this is a very difficult subject for a lot of people. Do your homework, go in and have a look at your assessments, go into your learner's guide and get an understanding and watch these recordings as well. It'll give you some insight, but as workers, education and awareness is paramount. You'll learn from these videos on how to approach this with your clients as well. Okay, so we've stepped away from it. It's a pretty heavy topic. we're wrapping up the final part of this unit, which is CHCDFV001. Here I've added in the CHIME framework for personal recovery, and I think it's very important that we use a guide, a model, like this is varied models, but as you're coming into the skills component of it as well, consider what connection means. Consider what hope and optimism, identity, finding self inside those challenges, meaning, and empowerment. So I want you to have a look at the CHIME model and apply that when you're in that space. We refer to this as compassionate inquiry. So when we're in that space, it's non-judgmental, but we can say that and we can write it. But how do we apply that when we're actually in that space working with our clients? The most important thing is to make connection. CHIME framework is a great way to consider that. So the connection we have builds trust. And when we build trust, people may feel that they can rely on you to be able to help them find what they need to be able to make the changes that could improve their life. Many times we're working with people where both of those partners will come in, and you're working with both because they want this to work and they want that, those skills, the knowledge, and the understanding to be able to turn that around. It's an extremely complex area that I work with offenders as well as victim survivors. So you may as well. This isn't always something that is just black and white. We really have to look at how complex and why it is so difficult for the law to even consider what is the violence around domestic and family relationships here. Okay. So what are the rights and responsibilities of your clients and your co-workers? So when we do intake and assessment and we say that everything you say to me is private and confidential, unless there is a risk to self or others of harm, and your safety is my priority. However, you are the others, and so are your colleagues in the workplace. So we have a responsibility to make sure that when we are doing that intentional interviewing and getting the active listening is giving us information, we need to be aware, is the risk heightened for our client and also for the client coming into the service and accessing that? You have to make sure that you are safe as well, and so are your colleagues and peers. So identify also what the client's needs are. We're going to unpack some of that. So there's needs for assessment. We call that intake and assessment when we first start working with our clients. We're responding to the client's needs, not what we think the client needs. That's very important. And then referral sources out. Who else can we put in and wrap around supports? How can somebody get resources to be able to help them when they're not there working with you as their worker? And I call that our in the meantime. So if we're working with someone and they see us once a week for 1 hour, what's going to happen with the other 164 hours that we're not going to be around them and they're awake? So you need to think about what resources. I know I raised one particular website, but have a look on your local area. What is out there for your local resources? Who offers emergency and crisis accommodation? Who knows where you can go for emergency financial support? Who can somebody go and speak to get that legal advice? These are things that we may or may not have in the organisation that we're working for. And because it's a community matter, we will often bring in other community services. So there's different organisations that are referred to as Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 and Tier 4. So the police are Tier 1, domestic family violence services are Tier 1, as well. Child safety are tier 1. So they are often your first responders, but there's quite a lot of workers who are now very closely involved within 24 hours of something being reported. Identifying the client's needs if they are unable to put voice to that. Oh, is that domestic family violence? I didn't know. So we use questionnaires, intake forms, case documents. We keep a record. It could be a legal document presented before the court. How we classify risk on our intake forms, and information from service providers, referrals, and then making sure that we get consent from our client to do that. So your client's needs and rights may need assistance from, say, Centrelink, or they may have a stop-go bag where they've been able to put some funds aside in case of an emergency. I mentioned when we first started talking about this unit that if someone is working in Australia now under Fair Work Australia, we actually have the right to 10 days of domestic family violence leave. Now, that's for anybody who wants that. It could be for a victim survivor or someone to go and get that mental health support that they need because they're not managing and coping, or that they're seeing their rights maybe differently. But there is absolutely no right to assault anybody or abuse anybody. And that's what this is, domestic and family violence abuse. Access to services, how to get that, appointments, ongoing assessment and support. We talked about how it can take people quite a few times before they decide, look, everything that I'm doing isn't working, so I think that maybe I will need to leave. And then what does that look like? That safety plan, you're going to create that. Referrals to specialist services and making sure that we've got consent to do that, and only share what's relevant. It is up to the client to share all the information if they choose to. So the rights and safety, the legislation, rights in your state and territory, your responsibility as a worker, go to your first access site, follow those policies and procedures. But every member of the public has a right to report if they're concerned, and you can ask for wellbeing checks. You might be aware of sometimes that neighbourhood fatigue can happen where neighbours often do know. I spoke initially about Erin Pizzi, who opened up the very first shelter for victim survivors of domestic family violence. There are now shelters for women, but there's also shelters for men. And there's shelters only funded, however, if that person will take the matter to court and get a protection order. If you don't, then the funded services can't assist you. So it is an eligibility requirement they expected of you. You'll have a code of ethics and you'll need to follow those. So how do we identify and respond? It'll be in your policies and procedures, the protocols you must follow. If there's a threat to safety, then the risk is escalated. So when you jump into your skills assessment, refer to it as low, medium, or high risk. How that person presented, what you saw, what they stated will all go into your notes and into your skills assessment, your role play. What evidence is there of physical injuries and how you document that, what you observe as well, they're your indicators. And then avoidance of discussing possible abuse. Like, I don't want to talk about it. So this is the work that you're going to be doing. And how do we do that? We do that by using our micro skills. Learn about your micro skills from the videos that we've shown you. How to unpack some of those as well. You'll have your own style when you're working with clients, but we all work within those guidelines. So there's lots of different workers, lots of different styles, and they all fit. But connection and engagement and that unconditional regard, compassion and empathy, that is something that's often done before we even speak. So your active listening your body language, those non-verbal cues, the paraphrasing. I hear you and I understand. That respect, acknowledging that it's difficult, and believing. And for most victim survivors, they will tell you the two most important things throughout the treatment, because often there is a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma impacted, is to have their story acknowledged and be believed. And the other is that they can continue to come back to the service, because this is so complex. Just by leaving and escaping does not mean that the impact of that doesn't happen for years to come, because these are psychological injuries, and these are injuries that can take a lot of time to heal from, and it can only happen with the work that you're going to enter into, which is your support work. So if you decide that this is an area you want to specialize in, then you'll go deeper. But for this unit, this is enough for you to have an understanding around what knowledge and skills do I need to be able to discuss that when I'm doing a support plan with somebody, or a safety plan, and creating that and hearing this story through a different lens, one that's both legal and ethical. You'll do case management, you'll allocate services. In First Access, there's more than one service, so you might refer someone internally to your counselling, but you might also, with the scenario, outsource to another emergency accommodation, and assist the client find that information out as well, or show them how to get that information if it's not happening today with you. So we do that through interviewing, making sure that the client gives consent, where we program the intervention, which is our safety plan, and that we do the referrals out. It's still up to the client if they choose to take action on that. Crisis situation and the long-term support, that's where it's most valued. So long-term support gives stability and connection. Crisis situation requires an immediate response. You're going to have to work out what risk. Is this low, medium, or high? If it's medium, is it likely or potentially going to reduce and minimize, or is it likely or potentially to escalate? So it may be medium but could go to high if certain steps and immediate responses aren't applied. So consider this. What may occur if there's inefficient or non-existent long-term support of the client? That's your reflection point. Measure the risk if no action is taken. How likely is it that the person's risk could increase if that plan is not put in place? That's your cue to develop a safety plan. What would that look like? Where could you go? Do you have any support? Could the children be with a family member at this time? So when we work with different groups, it could be cultural belief that considers that that is not abuse. It could be a religious belief around forgiveness. It could be sexual identity, where that person may be more vulnerable. It could be around age, and it could be around differing abilities. So there, in some cultures, there are certain beliefs and values, and this could be in direct conflict with how that person is living and how they want to live. And then, of course, it can't be in direct conflict with the legislation or our policies and procedures. But we can't go in there and tell somebody what to do, because we already know, and we've discussed, that this could actually take, on average, 7 times before someone feels confident or ready or aware enough and feels that they have a plan in place. If you think that that person does not yet have capacity to make those decisions because the risk is really high and they are now more vulnerable, you may have to be the one who makes that immediate response and report to your line manager. So the client's needs and what services are out there. Safety, physical and emotional security. At the beginning, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of need and the rights to feel safe and have shelter. What type of assistance are they looking for? Can they get that from us, or is that something we would do a referral? And what protective plan is in place? What protection have you got? Credit on your phone, a bag, a stop-go bag, something where you can just go and leave it somewhere else or have it somewhere safely if you ever do need to. So there's a lot of risk around leaving. There's a lot of risk each time somebody takes action to get support around domestic and family violence, because it moves out of that secret, something only we know, into out in the public arena. And there's a lot of shame and judgment around that. Because some offenders don't see themselves as a bad person. Some offenders may go, this is what you made me do. And I don't put gender into this space. I know that the media educate and there are more occasions. However, whoever we're working with, it is about the person, their human rights, rather than male or female. There's very effective female and male workers. And of course, victims of domestic family violence can be any gender. Often, the safety plan involves accommodation, emergency or crisis, counselling and support, which can be ongoing, court support and advocacy work, and then provision of assistance. What supports do you need? Is it financial? Is it shelter? Is it counselling? Is it access to medical care? What are the needs of your client? Welfare of the children have to come into this if there are children. But domestic and family violence isn't necessarily people who are parents, but we need to be mindful because they would be the most vulnerable. Legal or medical information, and then what are the safety plans? And you will be creating a safety plan, and you will be doing that as part of your skills, and you'll be documenting what that looks like and providing that safety plan as well. When you're doing your skills assessment, it'll be asking those intentional interviewing questions and establishing that relationship first. And you'll gather that information through your active listening. All those open-ended questions. So identify what limits somebody has. It's something that I can't do on my own. Qualify that and go, is this something that you would like support with? Is this something that you think you could manage yourself? When you're doing a plan, there'll be some things that you will do, some things that you will collaborate and do together, and then, of course, some things that your client will do on their own. That's all part of your plan. You'll negotiate with them and agree and collaborate and get consent. Unless, of course, you must report because they haven't got capacity, or somebody has shared something with you about there's harm to self or others. You're going to have to make that judgment call and follow your own policies and procedures at work. First Access outlines that for us. So the information, intentional interviewing and share that. Accurate records, because it could be subpoenaed for a court case, and progressive, fact-based, the legal requirements. So if we're making a referral to another agency, let's just say we're looking at crisis accommodation, we talk with our client about it, and that's our consultative process. We explain why the referral is needed. We would get consent, and holistic care means wraparound supports. That means we're going to start bringing in other services to be able to help make this plan come together. We'll review those referrals and services to see if they are a good referral, if the client did access them or not yet. So you'll have standard policies in First Access about that. There's the individuals or stakeholders requested. So your client might say, I actually need some help to get emergency accommodation. Okay, that's something that we can do today. I can help you with that. or is today about getting information and considering what your options are. And then your stakeholder might be police or child safety, or another, it could be a family member who's asking for that support. So that's a stakeholder. Other people, allied health professionals as well, or housing, emergency, Centrelink, social workers. So Centrelink has different departments inside it, like Medicare is covered now under the roof of Centrecare. So it's called social services. So Australia Services is what it is. It still gets called Centrelink, but inside there is Centrelink, which is to do with payments. And then there's also, which is the Department of Social Services, DSS is the acronym. But then there's another department that sits in there, DHS, which is the Department of Human Services, and that is social workers. Now, they're at the same location, or you can get them through the same phone number, but you need to ask for that. So they are specialists in that field, and then they will do the intentional interviewing and provide different supports around different allowances, and can escalate a payment quickly around hardship payment, and identify if someone is vulnerable, and they will often link as well. So you may not be working at Centrelink, very aware of it, but we definitely need to know what is happening for our clients if we are working in that space. It might be that you're in a community centre. It might be that you're working in a residential program, but whatever role that you've got in the community, every one of us must know this core unit around domestic family violence, how it impacts the psychological safety of our clients, and then who else we need to put in for those wraparound supports as well. When we identify that there is a risk, then we must do an incident report. We'll be setting goals with the client. It'll have timelines, and that's what our safety plan looks like. You'll need some information from the client. They may have some resources of their own. What will be the strategies? The strategies are around, this is a good plan, but why is it not working? Or why aren't you ready to use that at the moment? What is happening there? What would need to be in place for you to feel more confident to take that step? What strategies in place to keep your client safe? And then how do we review that and modify it, change it if we need to? If both parties are going and getting counselling and that is making improvements, then we'll modify those plans. Or we may have to modify and escalate that the cycle of abuse, instead of only once a week, it could be daily. And that means the risk is heightened. So we get that through our intentional interviewing questions when we're working with our client. And if it does escalate, have they got all of the resources at hand to be able to get that help if they need to? Of course, we're going to encourage our client to call 000 if somebody is at risk, immediate risk. And then it'll be fire, police, or ambulance. That's what 000 does. So in summary, what are the rights and responsibilities of your clients and, of course, your co-workers when you have this information about risk? How do we identify the client's needs? We talked about some of the things that we see and some of the things that they will say. And then we'll have a look at case studies, which will sit around clients. You'll have that in your scenarios. But for this one here, consider Kim being a child in a family unit and Harley being the couple. So Kim and Harley have children. And then how does Kim as the parent and Harley as the child get that support that they need? So we have a parent who has escaped domestic family violence. And then we have Harley, who is 7 and under 18 and a vulnerable person. I want you to reflect on this. What is it like if Kim returns back to the relationship and Harley is exposed to this again? Where is your duty of care as a worker? How would you record that? What would your file notes say? And how would you approach this with Kim if she comes back next week with you? I want you to reflect on this before you go into the scenarios. So there'll be 3 scenarios here in your role play instructions, and I want you to refer to that. I'll pause here and we're going to go over and have a look at what that assessment might look like. Okay. So for this unit, I wanted to give you a preview of what the assessments are. Assessment task number 1 is a quiz. So it's recognise and respond appropriately to domestic and family violence. So it's task 1 of 3. So when you see T, it means task 1. So there's 3 assessment tasks for you to do. This one is your quiz. So I just want to walk through what to expect when you do this assessment. So item number 1, the very first part, and there are 11 in task 1. It's looking for here for you to put some answers into this. So this first one is about the value and philosophy. Describe what safety and well-being and why that must be a priority. Every person has the right to live free from violence and abuse. Put your thoughts around that. The question says in the table below, describe each of the listed values and philosophies that support the response to domestic and family violence from a support worker's perspective. Not our own personal view, but from a worker's perspective. What is your duty of care here for the client? That's what it's looking for. So what's the community reaction and what assistance is available in the community? Organisation's declaration to meeting clients' needs. So what is your ethics, your policies and your procedures? We will is what the organisation's dedication is around that. And that'll sit in your policies and procedures. It'll also sit around the scope of your role. So if you work on reception at a community centre, then perhaps you aren't directly hearing that story. You may be aware of someone looking and presenting vulnerable. You may even notice it through observation that there's injuries, but we don't have that story, nor should we have that story if it's outside the scope of our role. So always work to your position description. In these scenarios, when you do your skills, you are actually going to be through the lens of a support worker. So consider that. Okay. Let me share again. So in your student portal, you will have all of your tasks. In my portal, I have those same tasks as well around this unit. So here it says that we have task 1 of 3, which is your written quiz, your questions, and it'll ask for some comments. 4 or 5 words is not enough. 1 short sentence is. 50 words in maximum would be all you would be needing to do in task 1 in those questions that I showed you. You might be able to do it in less. You might be able to do it in 15 to 20, but make sure that you've read the question you answer. With task 2, it's asking for you to do some research. Now, you will get your information by doing your own research. I've given you a couple of guides around websites, your learner's guide. All of that is really valuable for you. And then, of course, we've got 3, which is the observation checklist, which is you to do role play once you've done your research report. It's going to take us to another page. Let's stop sharing there. Bring this back up again. So we'll give you a snapshot here of that particular page in Accelerate in your learner portal. So my view will look a little different to yours. Let's hide that control. Okay, so this is task 2 is your research. Task 3 is your role play, the skills. So at the beginning of this unit and in your assessment recording, it gives you written about 50% of your assessment work to get this competency in this unit, and 50% will be your skills. So because you are studying online, it's virtual, so you need to record that. Some of them you can do with an assessor and come into that space and we record that for you and give you that recording. This unit is one of those. So because everybody starts at a different time, then you let our team know and we will book that in for you and help you. We'll try and do that in a group so that you can each play the client for each other. Otherwise, our team at Hayter, our trainers and assessors, will book you in and schedule that with you when you let us know. So you contact lso@hayderinstitute.edu.au, and that is how you can do your booking. But we'll do all of that for you. In your induction, go back to that recording and go through those links of how you can get the support that you need as well. Reach out. So we have trainers and assessors who are available to be able to work with you, and study sessions will be available as well for each unit. So in this space here, this is what we assess you on with your role play. The very first question says, during the role play, I, as the assessor or another assessor, observe the learner demonstrating they could identify the client's needs. And you'll do that through active listening. What is it that I can help you with today? All those who, what, how, when, where, and whys. Watch those recordings. The intentional interviewing questions is about getting that plan ready. During the role play, I observed the learner, so that'll be you, in your role play, in your skills, build rapport with the client by using effective communication techniques. So that is eye contact, all your nonverbals. Paraphrasing, okay, that sounds hard. When someone says it's been really tough, it does, it sounds tough. Acknowledging, believing, they're your micro skills. Number 3, did you explain confidentiality and the rights and responsibilities of both the client and worker? That everything you say to me is private and confidential, unless there's a risk to self or others. If you're at risk of harm, your safety is my priority. And of course, keep in mind that you're monitoring whether you are safe whether your peers and colleagues are safe. If the person says he's waiting for me outside in the car, then, or she is waiting for me outside in the car, or they are waiting outside in the car for me, then that increases the risk, and that's your role as a worker. Do you feel safe at the moment talking with me here today? That's how you assess. Number 4 says, explain what the organisational policy and procedure is in developing a safety plan. So when we work in this space, we can help you and support you. Come up with a plan. Are you ready today to receive some of those supports? And if not, then let's develop a plan that we can review. And each time you come in and see me, so between now and next time I see you, what are some of the strategies that we're going to implement? So you'll listen, you'll capture that information, you'll gather the risk, you'll assess that, and you'll help develop a safety plan. So the other questions are around what we observe you do with your skills in that recording. So there are 3 different clients. So there's 3 different role plays, and each of those role plays will be less than 10 minutes. You'll need to read the instructions, go into the First Access site and have a look at what documents are there, what templates, they're all in there. And we guide you in your student portal of what those templates are. So when you open up your assessment, you will see task 1 of 3, task 2 of 3, and task 3 of 3. So this one here is 3B, which means we will only do the observation for that when you have completed task 1, task 2, and then book in for task 3. Do them in order, because task 1 will lead you into task 2 knowledge, and task 2 knowledge will lead you into being able to do the role play, the skills assessment. And you'll need to be able to do all 3 to be marked as competent to complete this unit so that you can have this qualification and accreditation for there. So I hope you found that helpful. Let's jump out of this space. It's quite a lot of resources, this one here. I know that this is a very complex unit. I want you to look after yourself when you're going through this. Make sure you take your breaks while you're working on it. This will be one of the hardest areas for us to work in as well. Trauma-informed practices is what's going to help you with that. But the guidance and the information we've got in both the written resources, your own research, and then, of course, your practice skills and working with the trainer and assessor in that space will coach and guide you. So you get 3 attempts in your written work, and we'll give you feedback. If you don't get it in the first attempt, we'll send it back to you and it'll say try again. And inside there might be 10, I think in the quiz there's task 1 there were 11, and it could be that 8 you've got, and then those remaining ones will give you feedback of what the gap might be. The same with your skills assessment and you're booking in for a role plays. There could be some feedback in there and you apply that. The idea, though, is to practice before you come in. You need to be ready and prepared, but we'll do study sessions. So you'll have 2 study sessions available to you with this unit. If you can't make it in real time, we'll have a recording around that. One will be about your written work, and then, of course, the other will be around your skills, your practitioner skills as well. So that finalises this unit of CHCDFV001, responding appropriately to domestic and family violence practices.